Well, it's that time of the week again for Sterlo's wrap-up. 7 rounds done now as we head into a big, long weekend of footy action. Anzac Day coming up this Wednesday, but we're looking back this afternoon. Hello, good to see you, Peter Sterling.
Hello, James. Yes, it did take 7 weeks, but we now have no undefeated side with the Dragons getting beaten, and every team has won at least one game with Parramatta winning.
Certainly did. Look at that smile.
It's been a while.
He's a happy man. Enjoy the moments. All right, let's go back to Thursday night. It was live and free on 9. The Roosters beating the Bulldogs 6 points to 0. Season of inconsistency, though, for this team that's still in the top 8, going loss, win, win, loss, win, loss, win.
Yeah, it was a game that had some criticism, and look, it wasn't pretty, but I think that Trent Robinson would look at his side's defensive effort in this game as being absolutely beautiful, considering they were so poor the previous week against South Sydney, where they conceded 26. They got carved up through the middle. That wasn't the case in a game where, well, defence certainly reigned, and the scoreline indicates that. I did think that the longer the game went, the more the Bulldogs threw at the Roosters. And I just thought to keep the Bulldogs to 0 in a tight game, it was a really good performance from Trent Robinson's side, because defensively, if you get that part of your game right, everything else tends to fall into place.
The Roosters now turning their attention to the Dragons on Anzac Day. The Doggies have the Panthers this Friday night. Friday, the early kickoff, the Warriors. This is always going to be an interesting road trip for the Dragons, who were previously unbeaten, going over there, taking on the team's placed second on the ladder. 20 points to 12. The home side getting the job done, bouncing back, and the first team to beat the Dragons.
Super performance, especially considering going into this game without Sean Johnson, no Solomon Carter. They lost Tohu Harris during the course of the game. And they were really, because the Dragons were good. So the Warriors needed to be really well drilled and on their game to win this one, and they were. I thought it was an outstanding performance. Especially, again, like the Roosters, they weren't that good the week before. I thought there's some real question marks. Maybe we were going back to the Warriors of old, but they answered that in kind. And there was one little incident here defensively that showed to me that they're all on their game. Now, a week previous, Matt Duffy came up with this kind of play against the Sharks and scored a try. He starts 10 metres out, but have a look. The more he explores, the more the defence comes up. He ends up losing 15 metres. Now, sometimes the biggest defensive plays are made when you're nowhere near the football. You can get lazy and sit back, and all of a sudden the ball comes your way and you're found out. That didn't happen there. They kept pushing up and pushing up and pushing up. And that one movement there showed to me that the Warriors are working really well for each other.
Okay, those two are still up there leading the competition together, the Dragons and the Warriors. After that match, the later kick-off on Friday, Suncorp Stadium, the scene for the Melbourne Storm, 34 beating the Brisbane Broncos 20. And perhaps some signs of the Melbourne Storm of old that went through to a premiership last year, Pete?
It was a wonderful game, and despite James Roberts scoring that try to open the scoring, the Melbourne Storm really dominated the first half, and you thought they were going to get away to a substantial lead and not be any chance of being run down. Did get a little bit of a benefit there from the
Just
Billy Slater try, no try, try, no try. But to the Brisbane side's credit, they got back to within 4 points on 2 occasions, and it was really only the Anthony Milford brain fade where he didn't put the football or his hand on the football in front of Suliasu Vunivalu that you kind of thought that broke their spirit to some degree. Scored that wonderful try there, but he sort of he really took the oomph out of the comeback from the Brisbane Broncos. So I thought it was a really strong performance from the Melbourne Storm. I loved their first half, and it was very much this kind of football where Cameron Smith got into dummy half, was throwing the long passes out and playing wide. And you can see here, what this does is it takes away the gang tackling of the opponents, so they can't dominate the play the ball area. It also takes pressure off Riley Jacks, who is very, very solid. But with Cameron Smith throwing the ball wide and getting the ball, especially to Cameron Munster so quickly, it just took a lot of pressure off, and it put a lot of pressure on the Brisbane defence. And you see here, it leads to a magnificent try for Billy Slater after Josh Adokar gets away down the left-hand side. But they really opened the game up in that first 40 minutes, and Brisbane found that particularly hard to handle.
Andrew McCullough with that elbow injury, looking like some time on the sideline. Josh Maguire said to come in and play some big times at hooker, it seems.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a surprise. That's the news coming through this morning. They've tried Sam Thaiday there in the past. That didn't work. By putting Josh Maguire in there, you take away from his running game.
Yep.
I would have thought Cody Nikorima would have slotted straight in, and you leave Jack Bird in the halves. But obviously Wayne Bennett has a different point of view with Maguire training there already.
Yeah, that's the way it seems at this stage, but who knows? He's hoodwinked us before, wise old Wayne, when it comes to especially that position as hooker, as you say, with Semi Thaiday. Look, the Rabbitohs and the Raiders were expecting lots of points to be scored in this match on Saturday afternoon. They didn't disappoint, 42 points to 22, but South Sydney, they are humming along very nicely, Pete.
They're red hot at the moment. They've got away to a fly. You see there the first 2 tries coming early, and really soft defence from the Canberra Raiders. And there really needs to be an inquiry into the defensive decisions and combination of Blake Austin and BJ Leilua. They were really poor early on in conceding those tries. But South Sydney going along beautifully in the fact that their attack looks like it's got plenty of flow to it, plenty of rhythm. They're not relying on structured plays. Defensively, they're strong. The Burgess twins, Tom and George, are in great touch. And you put Crichton, who wasn't at his best, and John Sutton on the edges. That's very formidable. And Sam Burgess doing what he does so well. He won't be doing it for the next fortnight, but for the hour that he was in this game, he was clearly the best player on the field and just takes them to another level. Unfortunately, he's taken the 2 weeks at the early call on the suspension. But when he's out there and Greg Inglis is firing at the back and Alex Johnson is scoring tries and the wingers are doing well and the halves are clever, it's a really good combination, a really nice balance to their side at the moment.
Quick thought from you, Pete, on Sam Burgess. He's just come back, as you say, from a 2-week ban. He's now accepted the early guilty plea for the grade 2 careless eye tackle on.
That's what I was trying to say.
On Aiden Caesar. Has he got a discipline issue? It's a long rap sheet.
Well, he does. There's no doubt about that. Black and white, it doesn't lie. Now, we don't want him to change his game too much because aggression is such a big part of it, and that's just the way that he plays. But he's crossing the line too often because it's now becoming detrimental to his football team and to himself. So, it's fine to go out there and play aggressively, but if you're possibly missing a number of games and maybe missing big games at the end of the year, it's got to be addressed. And I've got no doubt he will sit down with Anthony Seibold and work out the way to approach it. You don't want to detract too much from his game, but it needs to be addressed because I think that's now 3 charges in his last 6 games, and that's over the top.
Okay, watch this space with how the South handle that, but big blow losing him for another 2 weeks. Look, Tamworth, great scenes, massive crowd as the Tigers and Newcastle took their game there on Saturday night, and it was an absolute nail-biter, 22 points to 20. Newcastle scoring 5 tries to Tigers 3, so the better team on the night. Geez, they had to do it the hard way, though.
Well, I played at Scully Park when I was a schoolboy. It never looked like that, the playing service or the crowd. It was a wonderful occasion, and fortunately, both the West Tigers and Newcastle put on a great performance. So all those fans that turned up will be back there again for the next NRL game. They led 10-0 at half-time, Newcastle, and had put together a really compact first half. But when the West Tigers scored 3 converted tries in 7 minutes in the first 10 minutes of the second half, you thought, hang on, the floodgates are going to open here, because they would have done in the past. But to Newcastle's credit, they got together and they reformed and they put a stop to that, and they were able to put themselves in a position without Mitchell Pearce for Jamie Buhrer to step up, put a kick across for Sean Kenny-Dow and to grab this victory right in the shadows of the post. So now that's the 4th game that they've won this year. The biggest winning margin, I think, is 5 points, so they've all been tight ones. The big concern now, of course, is life without Mitchell Pearce. This injury, this pectoral injury, you could see straight away he was in trouble, and Mitchell knew as well. It's an injury that, going back, it wasn't a part of our game, but we get so many of them these days. I don't know whether it's the way that they train or the way they tackle or what these days, but once you see that happen, it's a lengthy stint on the sidelines. And you've got to wonder now whether Newcastle, when they get into those tight situations, whether they're going to be able to go on and win the game without Mitchell Pearce's guidance, because he's been a real leader up there on and off the field, and it's inexperience coming in. Hopefully Connor Watson will be fine. And even if he does come in, Brock Lamb and Jack Cogger, there's not much experience in those type of situations in those 3 players.
Can they make the finals without him, Pete?
I think it's doubtful now. I really do. I think it's that big a blow. I'd like to think that I'm wrong, and they've had a great start to the season. But Mitchell Pearce, he's been the catalyst, and he's been the nucleus of all the good things that they've done so far this season.
Hey, look, the later game on Saturday night, 26 points to 14. The Cowboys avoiding a 6th straight loss. They had the Titans in Townsville. Not a complete performance, but this scoreline actually almost flatters the Titans with only a couple of late tries that got them sort of back in with a bit of respectability.
Yeah, they were poor. You know, there was criticism of the Thursday night game. I found this one the hardest one to watch. And I don't think in any way the Gold Coast Titans have played North Queensland back into form. You know, I still think that there's a long way to go for this North Queensland side. The 2 tries they scored before half-time from set plays were excellent and a sign of, you know, I've called their attack predictable in the opening rounds. You know, they were really nice plays, but I still think that there's some of their players who are well below form. Thurston was good, Taumalolo was good or better, but I thought that their opponents were really poor. And in some ways, that also flattered the North Queensland performance because it took them a long time to get on top of the Titans.
Well, no matter what team was taking on Manly this week, they would have been happy that it was Manly that was going to be their opposition. It just so happened to be the winless Parramatta Eels, considering what was going on off the field for Manly. They did make a surprise start with the first try, Pete, but then the floodgates opened 44 points to 10. The duck is broken for the Eels. Yeah,
it was an opportune time to take on Manly, wasn't it, with the unrest out there in the club. And you never know how that's going to manifest itself, but you could tell after a period of time that you know, their minds weren't necessarily on the job. Now, that's an 88-point turnaround in a month. You know, obviously, Manly won the first round encounter 54-0. So for Parramatta to be able to come back, they'd only scored 9 tries in the opening 6 games. They got 7 in this one match. So it was a terrible afternoon for the Manly team. But the positive side for Parramatta is that they'll get a great deal of confidence out of that. The halves were excellent, smiles on their faces, some good finishing. They lost Jared Hayne fairly early in the encounter, so a decision to be made by the coach Brad Arthur is to maybe Josh Hoffman coming back in, maybe Bevan French if that shoulder is okay. But all good stuff for Parramatta. It just takes the weight off their shoulders a little bit, and the spotlight goes to other clubs now. But still a long way to go for Parramatta. They need to build on that. They need to take that confidence into the next clash against the West Tigers, who have already beaten them also this season. But a sigh of relief amongst the Parramatta players, club and supporters.
Yes, indeed. To wrap things up today, Pete, the final game of round 7, Penrith had the chance to join the Warriors and the Dragons on top of the ladder. Missed out though, 26 points to 22. The Cronulla Sharks lost their last 2 matches, obviously needed the win, had the home ground advantage, and may have finally nailed down that Josh Dugan will stay at fullback and Matt Moylan at 5'8".
Well, I think they modified the way they attack for this game with Matt Moylan. You know, they didn't rely on structured plays, and he looks so much more at home. And don't forget, you know, no Paul Gallen and Wade Graham this game. They also lost Luke Lewis fairly early on in the encounter, so they had to call on some depth, some young depth, and they were great. I was a little bit disappointed in the Penrith performance in the fact that they'd been an 8 or a 9 out of 10 the previous weeks. This was more like a 7, 7.5. Thought they lacked the intensity, especially defensively, in this game that we've seen in their last couple of matches. And also with the football, they were looking for the easy out. They were looking for the big play instead of being patient and building towards that. So it wasn't a particularly bad performance from Penrith, but nowhere near as good as they've been. And a really gutsy performance from the Cronulla side, who continue on a great record against Penrith. They've now won 7 of their last 8 against them, so a bit of a bogey team for them. Shane Flanagan would have got a lot of satisfaction out of that game, having to call on some players coming in. Sorensen, the try that he scored, fantastic. So good signs there for Cronulla. Penrith, a little bit disappointing, but I still have faith that they're going to be a real force this season.
It's a season that's going by like a flash, Peter Sterling. As always, thank you for your good time today. It is Sterlo's wrap-up. 7 rounds gone in the National Rugby League. And don't forget, it all resumes round 8 this Wednesday, Anzac Day. We're live and free from 3 for the traditional battle between the Roosters and the Dragons.